Hello everyone, before I get started here, this is the third part of what I originally thought was only going to be a two-part video, but decided ultimately it was best to make it a three-part. So hopefully you've seen parts 1 and 2. When I originally recorded what I thought was just going to be part 2, I did it all and had to be separate clips just because of how the way my camera works, but it ended up Part 2 ended up being so much longer than Part 1 that it just seemed kind of weird to me. So again, I just thought it would be best to break it off. So, but I wasn't planning on that at the time, so this is going to be basically picking up right where I left off at the end of Part 2 before I recorded my explanation of why it was Part 2 of 3 now instead of, Part 1 and 2 only. So I hope that makes sense to everyone, and again, hopefully you've seen parts 1 and 2 as I continue to take my trip down memory lane with 3.5, and yeah, anyway, thank you guys again for your understanding, and we'll just get back to, I guess, our regularly scheduled program. Alright, so up next we have the Races series for 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm going to start off with the slipcover of the Races series collection. So this had Races of Stone, Races of Destiny, and Races of the Wild. This slipcase was another example, actually, of the case itself being shipped as packing material to protect books that were inside. I think the store owner ordered one of these books. I think it was actually Races of Stone for me. And when he received it, it was inside of the slipcase because they did like a gift set, and I guess the supplier had a bunch of those but didn't have the individual books, so they just took the plastic off. And as a result, I was able to get the slipcase, which is actually really, really cool. The books themselves are probably amongst my favorites for 3.5. Because they have a wealth of flavor text, and this was also around the time that the inundation or the flooding of prestige classes into the game was starting to slow down. I don't know if Races of Stone was the first one to do it or not. This was the first of the series to come out, but this is for dwarves, gnomes, and it introduced the Goliath race, which became sort of a staple in future editions. Goliaths were recently in 5th edition, and either Volo's Guide to Monsters or I think it was Volo's Guide. But it gives you insight into their societies, how they live their daily lives, what their religious practices might be, or what days are significantly important to the different races. And it was just such wonderful information, and I really, really loved it. And again, with the prestige classes, I think that this might have been... Okay, no, this wasn't the beginning of that, unfortunately. I think it was right after this book came out, though. But if you love dwarves, you love gnomes, or if you're a fan of the Goliath, this was the first, at least 3rd edition book. I don't think the Goliaths existed before. I want to say that they were a unique creation for this book, but there's a lot of great flavor text in here, a lot of great, just useful information in all of these books. But of the 3, this was probably the one that I go to the least. And I think it's just because it was done right before they started to shift their design philosophy a bit. So it still had a ton of prestige classes that were 1 or 2 pages each, with the progression and the explanation of their abilities, and that was it. But this was the beginning of a series that would get much, much better. So, again, can't say enough good things about this book in particular. Alright, so after that, we had Races of Destiny. This was actually supposed to be the last of the series to come out, but if I recall, some things got shifted around and this one came out sort of in the middle. So this had your humans, half-orcs, half-elves, I believe, were in here as well. Halflings were in here. So it just sort of had like the human-inspired races. Yeah, so humans, half elves and half orcs. No halflings. Really? Okay. Halflings they're in the next book, sorry. But then they had a new race called the Illumians. And these guys here. They're an interesting concept. I don't remember a ton about them right now, so I don't want to try to quote specifics and be wrong. But I know one of their big things was they had these like glowing sigils that hovered around their heads, and they were like words of importance to them, and I think they each also conveyed certain abilities. It was an interesting concept, but they never ever did it again. So I don't think it caught on too well. It was one of those things that I think from a conceptual angle seemed kind of neat, just never really meshed, I guess, or gelled the way that they were hoping. But this was the book that started the change in design philosophy for the prestige classes, which was what really impressed me about this, and is what made me more willing to get some of the books later on. If we can get to it. Excuse me. So the biggest thing about this was they would actually give you like the prestige class information. So we have like the lore delver. It gives you their breakdown of their abilities, some information about playing them, but then it starts to go into how do you incorporate these classes into the world? What's some of the lore that you can learn about them because they're sort of a unique and new thing? How do they work in the game? So there's just like and some sample encounters with the different prestige classes put in there. Excuse me. So it was just, again, it was something that it was finally, they were putting the thought, not the can we, but, should we and how do we incorporate these classes, into the game. And for me, it made prestige classes much less painful, because now I could just sort of read through that information, and if I liked the write-up, then yeah, I would be willing to incorporate stuff in. But just having, 30 prestige classes in a book, taking up half of the book, and then most of them are just like, they're sort of a one-trick pony that's like, okay, that's kind of a neat idea, but why would this ever really exist, sort of thing. So this was when they started changing that, and it was, again, just a really, really great book. So I can't say enough about this series as a whole. And then up next is my favorite of all of these books in this series. This is Races of the Wild. So these are your elves, your halflings, and your raptorians, which are which is basically a bird-like race. It's not like the Aarakocra. They look like elves, and they're winged, and they have like I guess the biggest thing that I took away from them is that they have longbows that they use with their talons and feet, which is kind of a cool idea. They have regular arms, but again, it was one of those races that never really caught on. I think it was just something they were trying to design for this book. But the information on elves and halflings is really, 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 really great. And again, really well written up prestige classes stuff, there was so much rich flavor in this book with not a ton of rules. And that was happening right around the time that I was getting sick of all the new rules or mechanics just getting piled on to the 3rd edition game. Because there was a lot of that, unfortunately, with 3rd edition. So this was around the time that it's like, that's not really sustainable, so let's actually put a little more effort into what we're doing, or at least effort into explaining these things. And it was just so well done. I loved reading the day in a life story, which took place at the beginning of like each race's description. So it was just a little story, and nothing grand. It was just they wake up, they go about their day, and just how they interact with some of their friends or neighbors or what have you. It's just really, really cool to read. And if nothing else, I think you should check out these books for the flavor text, because there's just so much wonderful stuff in there. Again, can't say enough good things about these books, especially Race of the Wild, but I'm biased because elves are my favorite race, so I'm going to admit a bias there. Up next we have The book that convinced me to buy a campaign setting that I was initially ambivalent towards. So this is Races of Everon. So this was not included in my Everon campaign setting information, and the main reason is that the design of the book is nothing like the Everon books at all. There was a Races of Faerun book that came out for the Forgotten Realms, but it was designed like a Forgotten Realms book. Like, it had the same cover design and everything. This was designed like the rest of the books in the Races of series, which I was really high on at the time. And the owner of the game store that I got all this stuff from basically used the, it's part of the same series thing to lure me into getting this. And again, I wasn't interested in Everon at all, but I started reading through this book, and I really didn't like the idea of the Warforged in the beginning. And I will say it's kind of nice to see an Everon book where the Warforged character isn't like front and center. He is in the artwork, but like that's all that you see of him. So I really, really like that about it. But once I read the information on the Warforged, I actually kind of fell in love with the race. And it just convinced me to start buying the Everon stuff. And I was only a few books behind. I don't think it had been out too long by the time I got this. But this book was so well written, it made me want to buy the campaign setting. And the campaign setting turned out to be wonderfully written as well, and was great. You could basically do whatever. You could run any kind of game that you wanted, and not the ones that they sort of focused on. So if you didn't want to do the gritty, noir, like pulpy kind of campaign, or have like the action movie stuff, you didn't have to do that, but you had to read the book to sort of figure that out. And I think that was one of the big failings of Wizards marketing at the time. But this book fixed so much of that, and I loved it to death. And then we have Races of the Dragon. So this was one that, it's a good book. There's some cool stuff in here, but I don't think many of these concepts ever came back, at least not in the same way. So you had the Kobold, obviously. Then you had the Spell Scale, and then you had the Dragonborn of Bahamut. Now, we know Dragonborn today. We've had them in 4th edition. We have them now in 5th edition. This is not the same Dragonborn. This Dragonborn is essentially a blessing bestowed by Bahamut. In fact, they're called the Dragonborn of Bahamut. So they actually start off as a different race. And then they shift, or they meld, or they morph into this after being blessed by Bahamut. So it's kind of an interesting idea, and it's a racial template. So you apply like the stat modifiers on top of what you had for the race, and they could cancel out. Like, for example, I think if you were an elf, because I want to say that the racial modifiers were +2 to con, -2 to dex. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So if you played an elf, then it balanced out your modifiers. If you played like a dwarf, it kind of did like the opposite sort of thing. So it really reinforced the racial modifier while really penalizing the penalty. But anyway, there was some cool stuff in here. I did not use this one very much, but again, the writing was really cool, and the day in the life for the Dragonborn of Bahamut. I think there were multiple stories, but I remember one of the stories was about an individual who was once a Dragonborn, but was slain in battle and then reincarnated. So not resurrected, but reincarnated, and they came back as just a regular demi-human race, and trying to deal with having that blessing bestowed upon him only to have it taken away. So it was a cool concept, but overall I prefer the Dragonborn as just their own standalone race. I think that was just much better that way, but this was still a cool book nonetheless. Alright, up next we're just going to get into some adventures, because they're just what I have piled up here. The first thing, I'm not going to show these all in excruciating detail, but there are the Fantastic Locations products, and that's not one of those either. So Fantastic Locations, I feel like am I missing one, or did it just get... Okay, I think I'm missing one. But there were, I think, 5 in total. I'm sure it's on the shelf somewhere. I'll find it. Hellspike Prison is the one that I feel like is missing from the this particular set. But it'll turn up. But these were a product that was sort of cross-promoted with the minis line. So you had, so it came with 2 maps, a little adventure that used like specific minis that they would tell you which ones to choose from, and they were just sort of neat little things. It was kind of just a cool way to get like a map pack that also had some utilitarian purpose to it, which was, again, I think the big thing for me, why I liked it so much. Again, these really cool products. I think a lot of them are actually available print on demand as well. You just, if you get the PDF bundled in, where you can get you can like print them off, because they just have each section of a map as its own individual page. Then we have Barrow of the Forgotten Kings. This was actually the first part of a 3-part adventure. I never got the rest of them. There was like the Fortress of the Auntie, and there was another one that I can't remember what it was. I never even really read this. I just picked it up because it was what was, you know, coming out at the time. But I was at a point where I had so many adventures already. I just didn't think I was ever going to get a chance to use it, so I didn't bother with the rest of them. I wish I could say more about it. This is something that I will probably do a review on later on when I get a chance to sit down and read it. Then there's Scourge of the Howling Horde, and this is sort of meant as kind of like an introductory style adventure. So this is a more basic or simplified adventure with the goal of having it be something that you would run for your first ever D&D game sort of idea. It's actually a really cool adventure. I really do like it. It's actually, is it fully? Yeah, it's actually fully stapled. So this isn't one of the ones where you can take the pages out and just see the inside covers separately. But again, really cool. It has a black dragon in it, a little baby black dragon. So I'm not gonna lie, again, a little bit of bias there, but this was a great adventure for beginners, and it's one of those ones that I think I was going to do a review of and just sort of fell away from that. So one of these days I'll pick that back up. To go along with that, we had the Shattered Gates of Slaughtergrade, and this was a like a module sort of thing that you bought that had multiple booklets in it, had the folder thing. This is sort of the design they would use for 4th edition adventures as well, which was really cool. I remember liking this adventure, but again, I never got a chance to really run it or do much with it, so I don't have a lot of fresh memories of what it was about at this point in time. But it was something that, again, I thought was really well done. It just never got a chance to run at this point in time. And then there's Red Hand of Doom. I think I talked about this before, at least in passing. It was available print on demand through DM's Guild, and then they took it away because there were some issues with it. But then they brought it back. I think it's still available at this point in time. But this is a really awesome adventure. This is sort of one of those mega adventure kind of things that was just basically, it was longer than your average module. This was sort of a campaign in of itself. It ran for level 6 through 12. And it basically had the players going up against this dragon cult. And one of the things I actually really liked about it was there was one of the towns was being attacked, and you actually had to go through and defend the town. And the players' actions could earn them or lose them victory points, and the amount of points that they had dictated what level of victory that they got. And it's something that I have used since, because I thought it was just such a well done idea, and I think it was something that was sort of combined with Heroes of Battle, if I recall correctly. I think these came out around the same time, but again, just some really well done and just awesome adventure. I never got a chance to run it properly, but I'm hoping to at some point. Alright, sorry for the cut, but it was really bothering me that I couldn't find, that I felt like I was missing one of the Fantastic Locations things. So I did find it. It was on the shelf. It just, when I was pulling the stuff off, I guess it just sort of slipped out, and it was there. So I feel better now. So up next, we're getting into a pretty notorious book. I'm not going to talk about it a lot here. I think I've already mentioned it before, but this is the Miniatures Handbook. So, Miniatures D&D Minis game was the replacement for the Chainmail game, which wasn't the original Chainmail that D&D would be made from, which was like a tabletop strategy, battle recreation type of game. But it was sort of like just a skirmish minis games with factions, stuff like that. The modern Chainmail, and they replaced that because I guess the metal figures were expensive, and there were just some baffling decisions made. Like the Chainmail game had a rich storyline, all the factions had a theme, and then they released the D&D minis, which was just based off alignments, and they were randomized, they were plastic, and anyway. But when the Minis Handbook was announced, I was kind of looking forward to it because it would be nice to have a comprehensive rulebook for the miniatures game, and I thought that's really what it was primarily going to be. But it's actually largely just another supplement for the role-playing game. So it spends, if it's less than, if it's 200 pages, less than 200 pages, it takes up until, like half of the book is dedicated to stuff for the role-playing game. This was where you had the War Mage and the combat medic, and there's some cool stuff in here, but I wasn't buying it for another role-playing supplement. I was buying it for the minis game, and this book got used less than the old Chainmail rulebook, which we started using as sort of a default way of playing the minis, the plastic D&D minis game. So it was, again, just really kind of disappointing, in my opinion, and was something that maybe should have waited until they had a few more sets out, and then just have it focused like 90% on the minis game, and then have 10% be like prestige classes based off of some of the figures or stuff like that. But again, it was just really kind of disappointing. If any of you have actually used this book for the minis game, let me know how that went for you. There was like mass battle rules and stuff like that. But even then, it wasn't great, because if a unit, even if it was like a cheap nothing unit, if it had a character class name in it, like fighter or something like that, you couldn't use it for mass battle. So you'd have to have like soldier or warrior or things like that, and it wasn't good. But let's move on from probably my least favorite books to one of my most favorite books, and that is the Dragonomicon for 3rd edition. Not going to go into a lot here either. Awesome book if you're into dragons at all, especially if you're playing 3rd edition or 3.5 or running it and you want to have some cool things for your dragons to do. This book is amazing. It stats out all the core rulebook, like the monster manual dragons, the metallic and chromatic, as well as having some new different types of creatures in here as well. But it stats about for all the different age categories, which nowadays we're not really having to worry about that, because we only get like 3-4 different versions of the red dragon, or any of the dragons, I guess I should say. Like, it gives you like hatchling, adult, mature adult, and then ancient. But back in the day, I don't even know if I can find how many. There were just a ton of them. So let's go with let's see here, blue dragon. Alright, brass dragon. So we had wormling, we had very young, we had juvenile, then you had young adult, then you had adult, so that's 6, then you had mature adult, then you had old, so that's what, 8, very old, which is 9, then we had ancient, which was 10, and then we had worm and great worm. So there were 12 different age categories back then, and statting these things out was brutal. It would take a very long time to stat out a dragon, so this book did all that for you, and had some really cool dragon feats and dragon spells. Just an awesome book all around, and yeah, absolutely love it. Then there's Libres Mortis, which was sort of supposed to be the same kind of idea, but for undead. This book was not great, in my opinion. I really wanted to learn more about like vampires and liches and death knights and kind of cool stuff like that. The Hukiva, the spawns of Caius, just all kinds of stuff like that. And it doesn't really go into that same kind of level of detail. There's some cool stuff about like undead diets, so some creatures that are dependent on something, or just creatures that are like physically addicted, like vampires with blood and stuff like that. It was kind of neat, but overall this book was sort of just meh, and which is disappointing because I love undead as much as I love dragons and the subject of the next book, and this one just did not live up to the expectations I had based off of the previous book, or what came after it. And what came after it was Lords of Madness. This book was awesome. So this is Book of Aberrations. So focuses a lot on mind flayers, beholders, aboleths, the Neogi, which is sort of like a worm-like race that are big into slavery and stuff like that. But this was a really, really awesome book. It goes into detail about the anatomies of these creatures. It goes into details about like how they reproduce, which is gross in all of these cases. And I still say to this day has a much better beholder explanation of how new beholders are created than what we got in 5th edition, where they're just dreamed into existence. I thought that was really lame, but the way that they do it in here was just amazing. Gross, really gross, but amazing. Alright, up next I'm just going to show these both at the same time. We have the Fiendish Codex 1 and 2, Tyrants of the Nine Hells and Hordes of the Abyss. Same as like Lords of Madness and the others. These are books dedicated to devils and demons, respectively. The opening story in Tyrants of the Nine Hells, explaining how Asmodeus sort of created the Nine Hells and how he became the Lord of Avernus. Just amazing stuff. I loved that little write-up so much. I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's really, really cool. Really interesting book as well. Both of these, I think the Tyrants of the Nine Hells is the better of the two, but there's some cool stuff in both of these, and I don't think you're going to go wrong with either one. So both worth looking into. And then we have Drow of the Underdark. This was, I believe, the last book in that sort of series. Which was, it's all about the Drow, and Drow are, as much as I love elves, I was really big into Drow, and I still am. I still love Drow. So this book was really, really awesome for all the same reasons as the others. I did get to use it a little bit, and just the description of like Drow culture and society and stuff like that. You're just not going to go wrong with that. So again, if you love Drow or you like Drow, awesome book. All right, back to a little bit of disappointment here. Here we have the Book of Exalted Deeds. So the Book of All Darkness came out for 3.0. This came out early into the lifespan of 3.5. And the Book of All Darkness had some cool stuff in it. This one just didn't click again. It had the different vows, like Vow of Poverty and stuff like that. And I mentioned Vow of Poverty because that one kind of got exploited by a player in one of my groups, and it just I just didn't like anything that was in here. I don't know. If any of you have this book and really like it, let me know what stuff was in there that you really connected with, because it was just sort of a swing and a miss for me. But I have the Book of All Darkness, had to have the Book of Exalted Deeds. Alright, up next we've got, just trying to speed this along because I'm running out of room on my camera, and I want to get this all done as quickly as, or in one shot if I can. So here we have the Expedition series. I only have the first two, which is Expedition to the Demonweb Pits and Expedition to Castle Ravenloft. These are sort of updates or modernizations of some of the classic adventures. So like you had Descent into the Depths of the Earth, I think it was called. This one was kind of like that, but then Castle Ravenloft was sort of a combination of the first and second Ravenloft adventures and put together. This one I think was the better of the two. This one might be an original story, but I kind of I'm not entirely sure because I didn't have Queen of the Drow or the Descent adventures, so I don't have as much familiarity. But this one was actually really, really cool, and I would honestly be okay running this today in place of Curse of Strahd, and Curse of Strahd is one of my favorite 5th edition adventures, so take that for what it is, but this is another really, really awesome adventure as well. Alright, so to finish things off, we're going to get into the alternate systems for 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons, and this is going to contain one of my favorite books of all time that I'm probably going to do a separate video on, so I'm not going to say too much about it right now. This is not that book, but this is the Expanded Psionics Handbook. So I mentioned with Complete Psionics that the Psionics system in 3.5, I didn't touch on it too much, but in 3.0 it was kind of garbage. You had to have multiple stats to dictate different like saving throw DCs or different like potencies of different abilities, and then you had no way of increasing the potency of your powers. You just had to take the next highest version of them. So it wasn't great, but this one fixed a lot of that. You only needed one main attribute score like every other class in the game to determine your powers, your bonus power points, your DCs, your attack bonuses, whatever. It was all based off of just one stat now. And with your power points, you could now spend them to increase the strength of your powers. So, for example, if you had like a telekinetic push or a telekinetic blast that you manifest, it would say it was like a first level ability that did 1d8 force damage. You could spend extra points to increase it by another die. Like I think it was like if you spent another 2 points to manifest it, you spend the 1 to cast it regularly, and say you spend 2 more, so you spend 3 points total, then you do like extra damage. So it's just a great way of making those lower level abilities not become completely unused and worthless, and was more closely connected with how they did magic items. Or not magic items, magic spells, which I think is what they were trying to do in the first place. And they kind of failed with that in 3.0, but in 3.5 they absolutely nailed it. So this is another book that I would recommend picking up if you're going to get into 3.5, because it's a really cool system, and they did an excellent job with it. Alright, up next is my favorite of all the books. This is Magic of Incarnum. I'm not going to go into a lot of information on it here and now, but where Psionics was a variant spellcasting system, Magic of Incarnum is sort of a variant way of creating magic items. So you can create, like, there's basically this energy that the incarnates can harness, and they can form it to, to bond it with parts of like their body, like you would have like gauntlets or like a cloak or boots or something like that, and you could spend points to make these more effective. And again, I want to do a separate video on it. I don't want us to talk about it too much right now, but there's just something about this system that I loved so much that I really would love to see it make a comeback, because I just think it's a really interesting idea, and there are ways later on of being able to utilize both the magic item and the soul melds and stuff like that, but it's just such a cool concept, at least to me, and I might be in the minority, but I loved the system to death, and I would love to do a separate video just talking about that in of itself, so I'm not going to go into too much here. And then up next we have Weapons of Legacy. So this, it was essentially just magic items that can become more powerful as your character increases in level, which was interesting because about a year before this came out, I had something similar in my campaigns, where the character would get this legendary weapon that would only have a certain amount of its abilities right away, and then as the character went up in levels, the weapons would become more powerful. In this version, you have to spend feats to do it, and the feats usually require you to sacrifice hit points or saving throw bonus or something like that. So there was you'd have to invest part of your being into the weapon to make it more powerful, but it was still a cool idea overall. I would probably change things up and just have it gain power as you do without being a trade-off, but it was still a really cool idea nonetheless. Then we have Tome of Magic, and honestly, Pact Magic and Shadow Magic I thought were really, really cool. I didn't really care for True Name Magic too much. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about this book, so I don't think it was overly popular. But, I mean, at least they kind of separated the chapters of the different styles of magic with their own unique page design, which was kind of neat at the very least. But, yeah, I mean, it was, again, you know, beautiful artwork and stuff and some interesting ideas, but I think this is where they were just kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see what stuck, and I don't quite think many of these things really fully caught on, unfortunately. But again, some interesting ideas, so it might be worth checking out if you want just some alternate options. Alright, and then up next to go along with the Weapons of Legacy, there is the Tome of Battle, the Book of Nine Swords. So this has just, again, some more legacy items, including some specialty ones, like some very unique and specific ones. Not that none of the Weapons of Legacy were like that either, but I honestly really love the idea behind this book. But again, it just sort of was around that time that I just didn't have the energy to focus into it. But I will say that this is there's some great stuff in here. I think there's even some player character like class options in here, if I recall correctly. I don't think it's just weapons. So skills and feats, Disciple of the Sword. Yeah, so I think it actually gives you, yeah, you get some classes. You actually get some like full-on core classes. So some cool stuff in here. I just haven't had a lot of chance to really read through it. So again, this might be a topic for a future video. And then finally, we have Dragon Magic. And I would love to tell you all about this book. But again, very similarly to everything else, not everything else, but some of the other books that I talked about, this is just one that I bought because it sounded interesting. It was sort of near the, it was sort of the beginning of the end, because we were getting into September of 2006, and 2007 was not a great year for a lot of the stuff coming out, in my opinion. So I just never really got a chance to really read what this book was about. But it gives you like some feat options based off of draconic lineages. I'm assuming there's some spellcasting options based off of having like draconic blood and how that might affect your abilities. So this is one of those things that, again, I would love to dedicate a whole video to. And 2020 is the year that I want to do some of those things that I've been hoping to do, but kind of didn't get a chance to. So things like the Book of Nine Swords, Dragon Magic, and some of the other ones that I just never really got a chance to read. Or, I mean, to be fair, some of these books I did read, but it was, 15 years ago. So the memories don't hold up super well. And again, I think the issue was a lot of these books I bought with the intention of using, but the collection just started to get so big there was just no way that I could try to use something out of all the books like I was hoping. And then I just focused on, not having to bring too many books out whenever I ran a game. So, but again, it gives me an opportunity to go through and read these with sort of fresh eyes, and it'd be interesting to do that. So that was my 3.5 D&D collection. This is all first-party stuff. I don't have a lot of third-party. I actually only have 2 books, but I might do that as sort of their own separate thing. But yeah, so let me know in the comments below, what are some of your favorite books for D&D 3.5? What are some of the books that you may be like me and bought with the best of intentions and then just never got a chance to use? Or what were some of the books that you bought that you were really excited about, but then just never really, ended up using them? Or just let me know what some of your experiences are with some of these books, because I'd love to know. And one of these days, like I said, I'm hoping to, sometime this year, get into actually reading and doing reviews for some of these, I guess you could almost consider them retro D&D books now, which makes me a little sad, because it makes me feel kind of old. But yeah, so that was 3.5. I hope you enjoyed it, and it was a good edition. I really did enjoy it. I just ran it for so long that I burned myself out on it, but I do have a lot of fond memories running this system, and there's a lot of books just looking through this today that just really make me want to dive back into them and start giving them a read. So that might be how I spend the next couple of weeks. Who knows? But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Again, let me know in the comments below what are some of your favorite 3.5 books, or even some of your least favorite. You know, let me know. So anyway, yeah, just keep comments respectful. That's all that I ask. That's all that I ever ask. You know, that the whole point of this, channel is just supposed to be to have fun discussions. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. And the next collection to show off is going to be my 4th edition D&D collection. So until then, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for all your support and your wonderful comments. And I'll see you next time. Take care.